BBC News with Sue Montgomery. The mayor of New York City says at least 19 people have died in a massive fire in an apartment building in the Bronx area. Mayor Eric Adams said 9 of the dead were children. The commissioner of the city's fire department, Dan Nigro, said firefighters had found victims in stairways on every floor of the 19-story building, many in cardiac arrest. He said at least 63 people were injured, half of them severely. He said the injuries were predominantly smoke inhalation and victims had been taken to 5 different hospitals.
People were transported to 5 different hospitals, and we're tallying those numbers. The marshals will be in there, and I'm certain they will determine a cause. It is not suspicious at this point.
New York officials are calling it the city's worst fire in over 30 years. West African leaders have agreed to impose harsh sanctions on Mali, including closing borders with Mali and sweeping economic measures. Naomi Sherber-Ball has more details.
West African leaders have called for a return to civilian rule since a group of army officers toppled President Keita during street protests in August 2020. Mali's military rulers now say elections could take 5 years, a delay the West African bloc deems unacceptable. Sanctions have been seen to be effective in the past, but a second coup last year forced out the interim civilian government, testing the resolve of regional leaders pushing for reform. Last month, more than a dozen Western countries condemned what they called the deployment of Russian mercenaries to Mali.
Kyrgyzstan has lodged a protest with the Kazakh ambassador over the detention in Kazakhstan of a well-known Kyrgyz jazz musician after video footage emerged apparently showing him in custody and badly beaten. Here's Danny Eberhard.
Kazakh state television has shown footage of Vikram Ruzakunov, his face bruised and swollen. In it, he appears to admit taking part in the protests, but his relatives believe it to be a forced confession, alleging he's been tortured. They say the jazz musician regularly plays concerts in Kazakhstan's main city, Almaty, the focus of the worst violence, and had been invited there for that purpose. The incident has sparked anger in Kyrgyzstan and a protest outside the Kazakh embassy. The Kyrgyz government has called for Mr. Ruzakunov's prompt release.
The host of football's Africa Cup of Nations, Cameroon, have begun their campaign with a victory against Burkina Faso in the first match of the tournament, sending a jubilant crowd onto the streets of the capital, Yaoundé. In today's other encounter, Cape Verde beat Ethiopia. The Confederation of African Football has issued strict rules concerning COVID outbreaks, which have already hit several teams. BBC News. The Saudi-led coalition in Yemen appears to have used fake footage to bolster its claims that Houthi fighters have a major weapons stockpile in the port of Hodeidah. Footage displayed during a presentation showed a large missile in a warehouse. Yemeni journalists in Sana'a say it dates back to a documentary on the US invasion of Iraq in 2003. A Qatari women's rights activist who's been missing for several months has reappeared on social media, saying she's fine and well. A smiling Nouf al-Madid has posted several videos of herself on a newly opened account on Twitter. There had been rumours she may have been arrested. Iraq's new parliament has held its first session since elections in October. MPs re-elected the former speaker, but things did not go smoothly. Here's Sebastian Usher.
MPs showed up for their first session as Iraq's new parliament in a variety of guises. The biggest political group, known as the Sadrists, after their leader, the Shia cleric Muqtada al-Sadr, put on white shrouds in an apparent message that they're willing to die for their political beliefs. Independent MPs arrived in tuk-tuks, the small yellow vehicles that became a symbol of their cause. Once in the building, hours were spent in last-minute wrangling between the parties, causing the opening of the session to be delayed. When it did finally begin, it was disrupted by verbal and even physical altercations among MPs, and then the temporary speaker fainted and was rushed to hospital, causing a brief adjournment.
An Australian court will hear in a few hours the appeal by the world #1 tennis player Novak Djokovic against the government's cancellation of his visa. His lawyers will argue his visa should be reinstated and allowed to play in the Australian Open because he tested positive for coronavirus in December and was therefore entitled to a vaccine exemption. The government says this exemption is not valid for foreign citizens. BBC News.